Hello and welcome to another episode of the Talent GTM Podcast. I'm your host, Krissy Manzano, and today I have the amazing guest, Jon Russo. So, Jon, B2B pipeline growth is evolving fast. AI-driven insights, personalization, smarter search are really redefining how we connect and convert. And so, Jon Russo and his company, B2B Fusion, help GTM leaders build modern revenue engines that align sales and marketing around accounts that matter most. And yes, you did hear me right. Align sales and marketing, which seems like an overstatement, but he is someone that I think is so brilliant on the marketing side, someone that I go to for advice and has taught me many things. And we're going to be diving into Google's Notebook LM today, which I'm so excited for you all to hear and kind of get a real, good view into how powerful this tool is for AI. So Jon, with that, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Krissy, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to dive in today, and big fan of your work as well. So looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, and we met through Pavilion. So Pavilion's a go-to-market community for executives and leaders. And so Jon and I both live in Nashville. I'm the co-chapter head of Nashville, and we've gotten to do some fun events together. And again, just witness he's taught me so much about marketing. Right, I have a sales background before I started this recruiting firm, and so I've been all in on marketing, and it's been really great to learn from folks that have done this way longer than I have. And as AI is evolving and changing and looking at, how to work smarter, right? So yeah, excited for our conversation today. But before we kind of get into go-to-market strategy and AI tools like NotebookLM, can you kind of share your background and the work you're focused on right now?
Yeah, sure. That's my favorite topic. We could spend all 30 minutes on that. Just kidding. So I have been in the sales and marketing world for the better part of 20 plus years. I've been a chief marketing officer for 10 plus years in public and private companies, have scaled through exits, through IPOs, pre and post. So I've gone from 50 million to 200 million, 0 to 50, 500 to 600, all as head of marketing, primarily in technology companies in Silicon Valley, New York City. And as you mentioned, very recently, I relocated to Nashville. I've also spent some time in Luxembourg as well as a bit of a detour. But I'm very passionate about the marketing area. That's kind of career-wise. At the same time, and that was when I had jet black hair. Now that I have white hair, I was frustrated with my agencies and their performances along the way, and just never felt like I connected well with them enough because many of them were not operators. And so a little over 10 years ago, I went on a journey to build an organization that was primarily operators that had operating experience in the BDR, SDR, sales world, as well as the marketing world at the intersection of systems and strategy. And that's really where we focus today. And there's two primary questions that come up these days in terms of where we engage. And because we're a little bit more upmarket, we typically get a question around, hey, I've invested a lot in XYZ platform, a 6sense, a demand base, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not getting the ROI out of it. I'm not getting the revenue that I expected. How can you help? That's one question we come in and help solve. The other question that we're increasingly being asked, which relates to our topic today, is, I have these platforms, or do I need these platforms? Is there another way? And with AI now, there's a variety of different ways to solve for very similar problems that we had, say, from 2013 to 2023. In the last year or two, the ice cube has melted and there's new ways to go about it. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that with NotebookLM as one of those ways to solve aspects of it. So those are the two primary questions that come up in today's kind of focus.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One thing I wanted to highlight is you talked about, how you got into being an entrepreneur and starting a company, right? And I just, spoke to a lot of students in Texas at my alma mater ACU recently, and one of the things I was asked a lot was like, when do you figure out when you get into entrepreneurship, right? And this is a perfect example of having experience, right? Whether you're young and you've been working a lot, or as you go through your career, what's so great about that is you can see pain points, right? And they're typically pain points that are so frustrating that they're not solved. And like, I know what to do here and fix this. And there's enough of a pain with a large enough market for me to solve it and be really, specific and niche, right? So I thought that was just a great example of your story and kind of going through that. You talked about, especially your second question, right? Companies, trying to figure out, what do I need to use, right? And I think that's like, I mean, we're even in that place, right? It feels like every tool, it's great at one thing, but it's not great at this here, right? And like, I'll give you a perfect example, like newsletters, right? So many, like you've got HubSpot, who has like a great setup for newsletters. You've got Beehive, you've got MailChimp. HubSpot in particular is so limited on how many people you can send out a newsletter to, right? And you have to pay a ton of money on who you can send. But then you've got Beehive, who's more open in how much you can send it to, but it doesn't have a slick of a feel. It's more like, an individual person versus a company brand. And then you have MailChimp. And my question for you is kind of twofold. One, what's your advice to people when it's like, hey, I need to send out something for 20,000 people, but this platform works and tracks all the analytics so much better. So do you get two systems still? And then the second piece is, with AI and with digital marketing just having exploded, right? And all the assets and the free assets you have, should marketing budgets be going down versus up?
Ooh, that's a tricky question on the second one. So I'm gonna give you a really long answer to stall on the first
Okay.
answer. On the first answer, it's really interesting because I've now seen kind of three shifts here over the last decade plus. We saw marketing automation, as you mentioned, HubSpot
Yep.
getting adopted and kind of the challenges there. Then the ABM platforms, which ironically had very similar challenges, meaning your data has to be clean. You have to have the people that can execute on the tools. You have to have your strategy defined really well. But typically, what happens is people get tool happy and they get whipsawed by the tools. And because of that, they don't really have the end in mind. And now
Yep.
we're seeing that same exact thing play out with AI, where
Yep.
there's an explosion of tools and we can get whipsawed around all the possibilities and machinations of tools. And the other challenge in today's environment that didn't exist before is these tools are evolving every day. So by the time this podcast gets published, there could be something I say that's already changed,
Yeah.
and that's really not happened before at this speed. So you've got a lot of different variables. So I think in your situation or in any situation, I would start with what is it? What if you had a clean sheet of paper? What is the ultimate outcome that you're really focused on? And then I'd back into, well, who in the organization is going to have the capacity to train up or monitor this situation? You're the CEO, you're doing a lot of things. It's probably not going to be you. You may have to impart that knowledge to somebody else.
Yeah.
In an organization, it's the same thing. Do you have a marketing operations person? Do you have a revenue operations person? Are they skilled enough? And you'd want to involve them in this decision too. That's the other thing. As a leader, you'd never want to make a decision on their behalf
Yep.
because that can really backfire in a big way. So
100%.
I think if you kind of work your way backward and then get to the tools to kind of figure out, okay, what gaps exist or what gaps don't exist, probability of success might be a little bit higher. Otherwise, you're just getting a tool of the flavor of the day and kind of plugging it in,
Yep.
or you're getting what we see in a lot of cases where people have invested in these tools and they're becoming shelfware
Yep.
because the strategy is not defined, the data sucks. The data is a real big one. The data quality is really bad, so AI is just propagating bad data or
Yeah.
bad information. And people don't like really focusing on the fundamentals. They get really excited about the shiny new tool as opposed to the fundamentals. So there's a lot to unpack there on your first part of your question. On the second question about budgets,
And
um,
maybe I should say tech stack budgets, not necessarily
tech stack
like
budgets, yeah. And
for
and and
hiring.
in
Yeah.
fairness, I think a tech stack and potentially people. This too is going to be an unusual, I think, year 2025 going into 2026 for marketers. And I'd be curious, what you're hearing in your recruiting
Yeah.
areas of sales and BDRs and potentially marketing. But my sense is marketers are going to be lucky if they're going to be flat year over year.
Yeah.
And the reason being is a lot of these boards and CEOs are asking the question, why can't this be done with AI? Why do we need more headcount? And where I think that's coming up, even with tech stacks too, is there another way that we can be doing this and cutting costs? What you probably won't see as much is replacement headcount. So somebody leaves an organization,
Mhm.
they may not get that headcount back. The bar to get that headcount might be really, really high. I don't want to sound like negative Nelly, because I do think there are some companies that are growing, but there's a good cohort, particularly in the SaaS area where we focus primarily, where they're really wrestling right now with any kind of meaningful growth. And because of
Yeah.
that, I think marketers are going to feel a lot of pressure on their budgets, on their tech budgets, which typically can range anywhere from 8 to 15% of the overall budget of marketing on an annual basis. I think you're going to see a lot of pressure on that, and a lot of pressure on headcount going into next year. So it's going to be a really challenging, early part of 2026. If
Yeah.
things start growing, though, there could be hope or could be reason. I think it's going to be success based, and a
Yeah.
lot of boards are going to say, "Hey, if you can grow it, okay, yeah, we'll invest in it,
Yeah.
but you're going to have to show that growth first before people make that investment."
Totally. I think you're spot on with all of that, right? And I know marketers have been feeling the pressure. I see them all the time where they're like, I'm gonna leave here because I am being asked, like, I mean, when we talk about cutting budgets, I mean, they're cutting them by like 70%. And it's this, typical out of touch board and investors who are not in the day to day, and they see something on paper and they're like, well, let's try that, right? And that's not the reality of how things work. And so it will be really interesting to your point. But again, if we can get some growth in that place, that'll be great. But enterprise type selling, right, is if it's not a consumer based like juggernaut opportunity. And they talked about this at the Pavilion Go to Market conference, right? It's really hard to grow in the enterprise up market space right now at the way that tech companies are used to growing. And I don't think everyone's like fully caught up to, we're probably there for a little bit longer, even with AI, but we'll see. It'll
I
be an
think you're
interesting
exactly right
year.
on that.
So,
Exactly right. And I would say you're seeing it sharply in private equity right now too, with the
oh, that's the
maybe the
worst.
lack of operating knowledge of sales and marketing in a private equity firm. There's a big gap there
Yeah.
that could be closed a little bit, but to them, it's a gumball machine. Like, hey, I put in, I give X, I should
Hmm.
get Y out, and that equation isn't as smooth for the operators as we know, because we've been
Yeah.
in the trenches and we know how hard it is, and it's only gotten more challenging. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think you're
It's
exactly
gotten
right.
even more challenging since we started our businesses, right? So I had someone say to me, but I will not name their name, but they're like, they worked with private equity, and everyone around that worked with them like echoed this. And they said, do you understand how hard it is to go to a board meeting and get asked questions and talk to or critiqued by people who were significantly less smarter than you? And experienced, right? But because they got the seat, because they had one bit of success as an operator, they suddenly think that what they say goes. And so I just found that interesting. But I agree with all that on marketing. It'll be interesting. I think you made some great advice, gave some great tips on that. So going and segueing into Notebook LM. So this is, Google bought this. I forget who actually created it, but tell us, like, for those who are listeners who haven't heard of Google LM, or those that are using it may not, like me before we talked, know the power of it. Tell me what Google LM is. Tell us what it is, what it can do, and the power of it and some of the use cases.
Yeah, and it's actually related to what you were just sharing about kind of that pressure that everybody's feeling right now, sales, marketing, and I'm sure the rest of the organization's feeling it too, but sales and marketing in particular. When we go into engagements, we're looking at ways to improve productivity through systems or ways that can scale. And I kind of stumbled on this technology, Notebook LM, because I was an early adopter of the Pixel, which is this right here. And that's actually one of my kids on the screensaver. But I bought a Pixel. It was a little over, it was close to 2 years, year and a half, 2 years ago, a very early adopter. And it came with AI. And my thought process on it was, well, I'll get really sophisticated. I run my business on Google. I'll get really sophisticated on kind of their applications. And that began kind of that self study of, wow, this is really powerful. And finding a couple different applications, and there's several applications, but one in particular, and I've got 6 that are on my mobile device right now that I use pretty much on a day-to-day basis. My family thinks I'm nuts, but there's a use case for every one of them. And this Notebook LM took a while for me to really grasp the power. A lot of people, and we saw this when you asked me to present at Pavilion on this topic, a lot of people have heard of it and they kind of dabble with it, and they're like, yeah, I don't understand this and I don't get it.
Right.
The one use case that brought it to life for me, and we'll talk about some other use cases that are sales and marketing productivity related. I had a situation where we were in a actually it was a client, but it was then a prospect discussion where we had talked with probably close to 8 people globally for this particular prospect, and the CMO said, "I need to know in a day, like where are we going? What are we doing? What did you hear? Where are the gaps? I need to know like right now." He had a lot of urgency
Mm-hmm.
because it was a PE backed firm. And that kind of analysis we were gearing up to, but usually it would take me a few days to kind of sift through, or somebody on my team to sift through all the notes and compare and contrast and figure out where the gaps are. I loaded up into Notebook LM, which is an environment where you can drop information. You can drop your information into an AI. It's like your own LLM. It is, according to Google, secure, and meaning, if I drop something in there, it's not being shared by the greater AI. And the benefit is it's kind of like a lobster trap. Once the data or once the lobster goes in the trap, it's not getting out.
Mm-hmm.
And you can query the data. So in this case, I had transcripts from multiple different companies, and I also had some presentations. It reads PDF. I've dropped it all in there and basically asked the questions of where are there similarities, where are there gaps. So it's a really good tool to do comparison. And instantly, it would tell me here are the consistencies, here are the gaps, here are the inconsistencies, with very little hallucination. And that's when
Right.
the light bulb went on for me, like, oh, wait a second, we should be using this for other use cases within sales and marketing. So that's what kind of led to the whole
Yeah,
Notebook LM journey.
totally. And you mentioned little hallucination. Why don't you tell people why it has less hallucination than something like a Chat GPT or Perplexity?
Yeah, that's a really thoughtful question, and I use both I'm a subscriber to ChatGPT and Perplexity at the pro levels, and I was the $200 a month ChatGPT at first, but I've kind of dialed back on that since then. Um, the difference with Notebook LM is the data or the LLM information that you put in, you control. So, meaning it's not pulling from the greater AI. And so the chances of hallucination like a ChatGPT or a Perplexity are a lot less. Now, what it does particularly well, though, is it makes the ChatGPT or Perplexity tools better. And I'll give you a couple examples. If I were doing a pre-call assessment on an industry that I didn't know a whole lot about, in Perplexity, I would go in and ask it for 10 or 20 URLs on resources that could tell me about this industry. The reason I know this is I just went through this with a prospect very recently, and it spit out 10 or 20 URLs. And then I could take those 10 or 20 URLs from Perplexity, I can bring it over into Notebook LM, and I can kind of pick and choose which of those 10 or 20 I want to ask questions of. And then I could go through my pre-sales process of, what's this industry structure, what's the ICP, what's the TAM, and it queries just what I put into that document. So it actually makes those tools more valuable. The other thing I would also add to that is, in our experience, ChatGPT in theory could do a lot of what Notebook LM does, but it pulls from the greater AI, and the probability of hallucination and the lack of control that you have is like 10 times higher in ChatGPT than Notebook LM. Notebook LM is called grounded, meaning it grounds to your information that you put in. And that's the primary difference
Yep.
in between those tools.
Well, it's secure too, right? Because it's not, you said the greater AI, like I dumb that down to say like it's not scraping the web, right? So, and it's not what ChatGPT can do and often does is if you go and you're trying to assess all that, it may not use the same sources every time. Not that those sources are wrong, but with NotebookLM, you're getting all of your information from the same set of sources that you put in, right? So whether it's 10 or whether it's here's 50 links and 5 one-pagers that I downloaded or things that I assessed and YouTube videos, like that, all of that information is what it's assessing to answer those questions or,
Yeah, yeah.
provide you that information, correct?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And they've also added a new feature in NotebookLM where you can, instead of going to Perplexity, there's this thing called Discover, and you can coach it to say, "Hey, I really want to get every resource related to Clay, Clay being a technology, data
Yeah.
technology of which we help our clients with. I'd like to get an assessment of that, and give me some resources." So there is now a new way that you can pull some of those directly into NotebookLM, but it's contained. It's a
Yep.
container versus, like you said, the messiness of ChatGPT or Perplexity. It's the wild, wild
Yeah.
west of data, and the security policy. I think is a little bit different too.
Yep. Question on that, and then we can move on. But if someone just plain devil's advocate was like, "Well, this is great, right?" But in order to make, if those are the only links that it's using, so the 10 in the example you gave, do I have to go through those 10 and make sure they're legit? And then that feels very time consuming before I get all that information. Or what would your kind of argument or objection be
Yeah,
to that?
great question. And you also can, I should say, in addition to the links. Well, let me answer your question first. You don't necessarily have to check for veracity on whether or not those are true or good links. You also have the ability to upload PDFs, Google files. You could add transcripts and text. So you can add everything. And I go back to, okay, like a sales and marketing use case. If I were focused on an account and I needed to get account intelligence, I could load up to 300 different sources of that account. And rather than having a meeting internally around what's going on at GE Healthcare for the executives that I need to bring on the next call, I could point them and share the notebook to say, it would be really great if you could ask your questions of this notebook. And instead of us having a long call and finding out exactly what's going on within GE Healthcare. And so that too could save time in terms of account planning process. You could do the industry analysis, which I talked about. You could do the account planning. Another use case, going back to the URLs or the data that you put in, if you think about sales reps and trying to train them very quickly,
Mm-hmm.
you could, in theory, put all of your onboarding information. And granted, there may not be a ton of SDR hiring right now, but I still offer that it's going to be a better experience than the AI SDRs. Like, I've never really deviated from that. But you could put all your product information, your training information. Think about it as sales enablement on steroids. And so your reps, instead of having to shadow somebody and losing productivity that way, 24/7, they can query this notebook and get up to speed quicker. So you could, reduce the ramp time of your reps pretty significantly. The last use case I'll end with is sometimes it's really great for competitive analysis or even case studies. You could dump in all your competitor information. So if sales an AE or an SDR has a question about competitors, they can query the notebook, assuming your marketing team is keeping that up to date. That too would be, a very valuable use case. We've even found one of our customers create case studies. So, the challenge today is marketing's creating all this content. Sales doesn't have the time to digest it. Wouldn't it be great if you could just query a database to say, hey, I need a customer who has used Clay in the healthcare vertical market and has had success, and query that, and boom, presents you the name of the client and the customer something that you could then use in your selling process. So it could really accelerate
Oh, that's a
your
great
sales process.
example. I'm like, I should be doing that actually for my stuff. That's a great example. You've talked about a lot of use cases, which are great for your business in particular. What's been kind of like the one thing or game changer in using Notebook LM
Ooh,
that you would share
yeah, no,
publicly?
I would. Look, I'm an open book, and probably to a fault. There's probably two that I use, and I spend a lot of time. I'm standing in line at TSA with my Pixel. This is kind of a cheat code for me, but YouTube, it will summarize YouTube videos in moments. So I've literally listened to hundreds of podcasts in and around B2B marketing, different technologies, different sales, and I trigger it with 3 words: summarize lessons learned. So I take the URL from YouTube, I copy it into my mobile Notebook LM, and summarize lessons learned. And I take a 30-minute, or in some cases this weekend, there was a hour and a half or 2 hours uh, podcast that somebody did that I really wanted to get the information from. And it just lays it all out. So if you're at the gym, you're in between sets, or you're at TSA, it's a huge time saver, and you can ingest content at a
Yep.
rapid speed. I would say that would be the other use case beyond what I mentioned earlier of, we talk with a lot of people internally. If we have the recordings, we can also assess very quickly what the gaps are, and perhaps we weren't able to do that before as fast. Now we can with AI.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. And in the learning piece, the one thing because that's kind of been the theme with all of this, right? Is like with AI, but then with Notebook LM, a way to learn so much faster. We talk about AI and how, there's a lot of people that, will say like it's taking over all these jobs, and, that you've got the AI SDR, which I've not heard anyone serious really, including myself, believe is going to be a thing or anytime soon. But what I think we don't talk about a lot is like, hey, from evolution, right? The folks that are learning and that are curious are the ones that are always, typically able to be super successful, right? Regardless of if they have high moral aptitude or not, which is another topic. But in order to do that, which is why a lot of people did it, you had to work really hard, right? Like you had to, be naturally curious, but then, spend time looking up things and reviewing them and trying to digest them and learn. And so what's so great about this is I think the folks that take advantage of how do I learn more in less time, it allows you to figure out how you strategically partner with AI, how you strategically position yourself and change without feeling overwhelmed because the change is so constant. I think those are going to be the real winners in this AI,
I think
transformative
you're
era,
exactly right.
right?
And I think we were talking before we went on recording here. You are living proof of this with teaching your students at your university, where the students were familiar with Notebook LM because
Mhm.
uh, they are in that environment where they have to learn in depth very quickly a lot of different areas, and Notebook LM is ideal
It's
for that
perfect for
scenario.
students. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
have podcasts that you can create, you can customize
Those are
now.
the coolest things, the
It's
podcast.
unbelievable. You could do video, you can do flashcards, you can do a mind map. So if you've got a really complex topic, you can list it all out. So there are aspects that are also in Notebook LM that are important. The use cases I find of the primary product are really helpful for sales and marketing, but there are other aspects that really make it a pretty unique tool to learn very quickly.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's funny, one of my advisors, we had done an event together earlier this year. And I remember after the event, which was so fun, we went, you know, somewhere in New York to get a drink afterwards. And we were talking about AI and, I was sharing kind of my views. And he very dramatically like grabs my shoulders. He's like, Krissy, wake up. Like AI, it is taking over everything. And maybe not like in taking over humans, but like you need to pretend you are a student in school and you need to dedicate time every single week to learn. And while it was a dramatic moment, it really did wake me up and go, hold on a second. I know that this is important, but I really need to be learning and spend that time. And what I told, those students, and when I tell students, anyone that are listening to this, is you will have a unique advantage because you have the time to study. Folks like us, it's
Right.
harder, right? Like
Totally.
with the full-time job, with the escalations, with the kids, and it's still important for us to be doing it, to carve out time that for things that we are subject matter experts in to learn about with AI. That's where you have to focus, not just do all AI, right? But for students, find an area that you're focused in and create like quarterly goals for yourself. I want to, I'm really interested in sales. So I really want to try to like learn more about AI and how I can be using that in sales. Or, you don't always have to stay in the same lane, but pick one thing and stick with it. And I think it's really important. And those are the folks that look, we always say this, right? AI isn't going to replace you, but someone who understands AI better will. And they have the opportunity to do that, as scary as this job market is for them, right? Because new graduates and executives are the ones that are suffering the most.
Yeah, and you can even test this to that point of kind of learning. If I'm a sales or marketing leader and I'm like, okay, that sounds great. What do I do? It's free. So you can test it on your mobile device, on your desktop, and you could test it amongst a couple SDRs or test it across a couple marketers or a couple AEs. You don't have to go whole hog on it, but you can test it to see what the capabilities are like and learn through testing. And that's exactly what I did, because when I first looked at it, probably like a lot of listeners, I'm like, what's this notebook LM? Like, what, there's not a lot of value. But until I started really banging on it, then the light bulb went on, and I really realized, oh, this is really powerful. It makes the other AI tools better.
Yeah, 100%. Well, we're out of time for now, but on a closing thought, right? We focused on Google's Notebook LM, but is there anything else that you want to highlight that people should be looking at that will be valuable, whether it's other go-to-market AI tools or anything that you would just give general advice on?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. And I should mention Notebook LM is like one ingredient of the Google suite. So I played around with Opal, Gemini. Opal's like a Make or an N8N, a little easier to use, actually, I find. And I've been using Gemini quite a bit. There's Pro, and there is Flash and Pro, and then they've got all sorts of offshoots now with Veo and Nano Banano and creating video. But there is one application from a sales and marketing perspective that we have found really valuable. It's called Humantic.ai. And what Humantic does is it's an application that sits in your browser and scrapes LinkedIn and gives a personality profile. And I have found the information from Humantic to be particularly valuable when I've been prospecting. We've shared it with our clients, our ABM clients, or demand gen clients as well. For BDRs, it's great. If you do connect with somebody on the phone, that's a challenge in and of itself, but having a bit of background as to how they receive the information, how they process the information, can be really, really valuable, and also helps with cold outreach as well. So it helps you craft in the style of the person who's receiving the information. So that's probably another tool that comes to mind beyond the Google stuff. And we look at a bunch of them. The majority, though, I'd say, are adding AI to existing tech stacks. So, we see a lot that way as well. But Humantic kind of stands out, as does kind of the Google suite right now.
Yeah. Great tips. Well, I feel like we could talk about this all day, but we can't today. But thank you so much for coming on. This has been great. Where can people find you if they want to reach out and learn more, on how to work with you or pick your brain?
Yeah, great question. LinkedIn is probably the number one way. If you see this, reference this podcast. So I know you heard us here. If you got this far in the conversation, but I would encourage LinkedIn is probably the best way to connect.
He's giving a 10% off code if you made it this far. Just kidding. But no, that's Jon Russo, JonRusso, founder of B2B Fusion. Jon, thanks so much for being on today. You can discover hiring insights and other leaders on the Talent GTM podcast. If today's conversation piques your interest, subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or our website, and never miss an episode. Thanks, y'all. Until then, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, Krissy.